Chapter 13 The Apple Incident 2 weeks passed since Nightmare had returned. Restless, he decided to give the visitors a chance, if only to give himself something to do. The first day he regretted. People who had been waiting for months to get an apple were lined up by the guards, all waiting to meet with him. Right away, something felt wrong about this. He felt like an imposter, like he was replacing Dream. Though he tried, he failed to adopt his brother's sentiments. Of course, apples were provided to those who were sick, injured, or were delivering them to those who were. But to those in emotional distress, Nightmare either found himself disturbed by their stories or numb. He only gave half of what his brother might have, turning away people he felt should work through their problems on their own. At one point, a human who was nearly on his knees refused to leave without something. When Nightmare offered him a dark apple instead, the man spit in his face before the guards took him away. That being all he could take, Nightmare sent the rest of the visitors away. From then on, the Silver Guardian continued the apple distribution, but told the guards only to send those in medical need. He would have no more of other people's problems. As the weeks stretched on, Nightmare counted down the days and the hours. For long stretches of time, he found himself pacing around the tree as if in another turn, Dream would be standing on the other side. But there was no such luck. It would be impossible for Dream to be back before 2 months had passed. In the meantime, Nightmare occupied his time with reading. However, he had his fill of textbooks in science and Rivaldo. Instead, he opted to read the books he'd seen Dream take to, mostly romance novels, but also fantasy and mysteries. Despite not gaining much from them, he found he rather enjoyed getting sucked into the drama of fictional people. He could see why they appealed so much to Dream. It was easier than he thought to lose himself in the adventures and the words constructed on the page. As the days finally passed the 2-month mark, Nightmare felt he was more restless than ever. He'd sit by the tree for hours, waiting. Then he'd move to the edge of the falls to sit. Staring over the city, the border was obscured in the hazy distance. Even if Dream returned to the south gate, it would be impossible to see him. Still, Nightmare liked to believe that he could. It felt impossible to do anything, even read, until Dream was back at his side. 3 days had passed since the 2-month mark. For the past 2 nights, Nightmare had waited up too long before finally going to sleep. In his exhaustion, his body forced him to go to sleep early, so he laid down by the tree at dusk and there remained undisturbed. His nightmares had been plagued by thoughts of Rivaldo over the weeks, but finally he was having a good dream. It had all been just a nightmare. Reaching out in his sleep, he believed he could feel Dream there resting beside him. A normal summer afternoon, the sunlight passed through the leaves above. However, it started to feel warmer than usual, the light stinging his eyes through closed sockets. "Dream?" he uttered before opening his eyes. It was not the sun beating down at his face, but a dozen torches. The silhouettes of many human men carrying the fires through the darkness. "Get him!" one of the men cried out as 3 dozen hands ripped him from the ground. Nightmare screamed, then called out for the guards. Completely surrounded by the intruders, a thick cloth was placed between his teeth to gag him. The men were laughing. His violet eyes dodged around them, trying to read their faces. 1, then 2 looked familiar, and then... Nero stepped forward, grinning. His green eyes glowed with a frigid malice. Adrenaline shot into Nightmare's skull as he screamed, flailing and kicking, but the grip on his arms held firm. Nero burst into laughter. "You should see the look on your face. Surprised to see me, Nightmare?" "He keeps worming about," one of the men grumbled before another kicked him in the knee, causing him to fall. Nightmare tried to reach for the gag, but the mob had their hands around him, lifting his face up to Nero's. The torchlight radiated heat against his bone, causing him to squint as Nero stared down at him. "Looks like I finally get to see the glory of the tree myself. You left me, Nightmare, beaten and disrespected before my father and the people of Rivaldo. Such an act cannot go unrewarded." Shaking his head, Nightmare's mind filled with terror. He didn't have time to think of what might be coming next. Nero reached for his silver crown, taking it off before placing it on his own head. "Look at that! Fits me well! It's not gold, but it'll be a fine trophy nonetheless." The men laughed as they watched the prince make a mockery of the skeleton. Soul-pounding, Nightmare breathed heavily through his nose. Where were the damn guards? They were supposed to stop something like this from happening. Can we eat these damn apples now? Called one of the men. Nero threw his arms into the air. Of course! Time to feast, boys! Eat to your heart's delight! Growling under the gag, Nightmare gave a defiant huff as he glared daggers at the human prince. Even if they deposed of the guards, someone would notice something happening on top of the falls. One way or another, someone would come for him and stop this madness. As the mob began to take bites out of the golden apples, a man Nightmare recognized came out of the crowd, whispering to Nero. It was the man who spit in Nightmare's face during the visitation weeks ago. As the man spoke, Nero grinned, leering back at Nightmare. You're right. We shouldn't let our guardian stand here and watch us as we chow down without him. Chuckling, the man grabbed one of the dark apples from the ground. Skirting close to Nightmare, he took off the gag before shoving the dark apple into Nightmare's mouth. Getting lodged in his jaw, Nightmare felt pain fire down his neck. He tried to spit it out, but the men holding him pressed their fingers over his nose and proceeded to push the apple further in. Wheezing and gagging, Nightmare twisted his shoulders, trying to fight their hold, but eventually they shoved him to the ground to push the apple down. Give him another one for each of us, he heard someone cry. No, let me go. He managed to get out before another apple was forced into his mouth. As they shoved it down, he felt intense pressure in the back of his skull. His soul was attempting to absorb the apple as it came, taking its time to dissolve. The more he squirmed, the more the men laughed. He's kicking his little feet, isn't he? Tiny skeleton man. The next apple that came, Nightmare tried to lock his jaw shut. He didn't care if they pushed in his teeth, he had to fight back somehow. However, the humans picked up on this rather quickly, shoving their fingers into the holes in his cheeks to pry his jaw open. In seconds, the effect of the dark apples hit Nightmare hard, his skull swelling with a mess of emotions all at once. Terror, sadness, anger. He could feel his mind wanting to slip away, but he knew he had to hold on to the anger to keep himself awake. Whatever they were doing to him, Dream was feeling it too. He had to do something to get out of this, at least for his brother's sake. He kept kicking as hard as he could, his legs swinging to push off the humans that surrounded him. This is getting annoying, a man cried before a heavy boot slammed down on one of Nightmare's legs. His scream echoed inside his skull as everyone heard the bone snap. The pain was more intense than anything he'd ever felt before. It grabbed hold of his spine and he couldn't feel his foot. The humans stopped only for a moment, but only so that they could gawk at his suffering. Now, we have all night, boys, said Nero as he came to kneel beside Nightmare. Reaching out his hand, a green light glowing over the glove, he touched the broken leg. In seconds, it mended, but the pain and the blood on his trousers remained. Nightmare stared at his old friend in horror. That was one of the spells he'd taught him. As if aware of the irony, Nero grinned. We have time to break every bone in his body. The men chuckled, reflecting the prince's twisted expression. Why were they doing this? Weren't they just here to capture him again, since he was so valuable? Why weren't they trying to whisk him away so they could continue holding him for ransom? No, by the look in Nero's eye, he had no plans of taking Nightmare alive from this place. This was personal. Unable to hold on to the anger, depression and defeat took a firm grip of his mind. Against his will, Nightmare felt his body going limp, refusing to resist. Let me see his ribs! I want to play with his ribs! His mind and soul for a few seconds disconnected from his body, blacking out. What brought him back was horrific stings in his ribs and back. With a gasp, he realized he was being stripped naked and was being held face down. The men were inserting different objects between his ribs, plying and twisting them. There he is! He's finally feeling it! One of them laughed. Next came the fear rushing in, forcing him to breathe. But every breath intensified the pain of their prying, leaving him to whimper. Ah, poor thing cries like a dog. Someone get up at that damn tree, I want some more, someone said to the side. Before blacking out again, Nightmare heard the men attempting to scale the tree, one stabbing daggers into it in order to climb up. He came to again, someone holding his throat and spine. He couldn't tell where he was in space as his body was yanked like a doll. Wake up! Scream! Scream, damn it! Someone grabbed his jaw. His eyelids locked for a moment with the dark, mad eyes. If he was being told to do something, he wasn't going to obey. Wrists being yanked backwards on his arms, Nightmare finally screamed, the man taking the opportunity to shove another apple in his mouth. What is that way over there? Step into it, I dare you, Nero chuckled. Wait a second. I'm not gonna do it when it's you saying it like that. Hey, look there. Look at his spine. I think it's turning black. Nah, you idiot. It's just dirt. Could be bruising. Yo, Nero, mind giving him another hit of your magic? He keeps passing out as soon as we start having fun. Yeah, said Nero, his voice coming closer. You gotta give our little prisoner a break. He'll keep blacking out from the pain if you apply it constantly. As soon as Nightmare felt Nero's hand on his back, he swung back his elbow, meeting the human's nose. Nero cried out, and Nightmare felt the briefest release of the grip on his other arm. In a moment of desperation, he tried to crawl away, but Nero grabbed his leg, dragging him back. Blackness again. Through the numbness, Nightmare felt he'd curled into a fetal position. The blood on his bones grew cold as his dust gently powdered the grass around him. Damn, man, I feel good. No wonder people want these damn apples. Eat and take whatever you can. Don't forget they're your payment. You won't be getting anything else, said Nero. As Nightmare's socket slowly lulled open, he could see he was still surrounded by dozens of dirty boots. If he moved an inch, they would notice he was awake. Hey, I don't think that's normal. That can't be bruising. It's too big. I think the dark apples are causing it. You think so? Let's test it then. Let's give him more. See if we can turn his whole body black. As his eyelids gained the faintest amount of strength, Nightmare glanced towards the white sea. There was a figure there for a split second, floating in the white. A human child with a familiar face, but half of it was burned off with the bones of the right arm exposed. Their eyes were hollow voids, and yet Nightmare swore they held an expression of sadness. Frisk? He mouthed, betraying himself. He's awake! Rolled onto his back, he felt himself held down again, but this time he didn't try to fight. He was in so much pain and so exhausted. This time they held open his mouth, shoving the apples in one after another. Oh, where do the little apples go? Or where can they be? One of the men sang. He rested long enough to feel the pain in his mouth gagging. Trying to pull up his legs, he felt them pushing back down, 4 feet standing atop them. No one was coming for him, were they? Not the guards, not Toriel or Asgore, not Dream. The dark emotions filled up his soul like a well full of poison. He lost count of how many dark apples they'd put in his mouth, feeling the residue of them inside his skull, leaking out his right socket. The socket went numb, and soon his vision through it faded completely. His bones stopped reacting to the strain, his arched back meeting the dirt, not moving. You did too much again, idiot! But this time, even though his body wasn't moving, Nightmare felt himself painfully conscious. We didn't kill him, did we? Said one of the men, slapping his face. He did not react. They don't die until they turn to dust, Nero assured, looming over them. Seriously, though, what is this black shit all over his bones? It really did completely cover him. The man had been shoving apples in his mouth, grabbed Nightmare's hand. He dragged his tongue along Nightmare's wrist and palm before his face cringed. Rotten apples. Hey, wake up! We're not done having fun with you! Wake up! A man said, kicking him twice in the hips, and another in the ribs. Nightmare did not react. His face was slapped again. I don't think he's waking up. An eerie silence hung over the mob as Nero pulled some of the men away. He knelt down by Nightmare's head, the silver crown glinting in the torchlight. I know you can hear me, Nightmare. Don't pretend that you can't. I can always tell when you're pretending. Several long seconds passed between them before Nightmare felt his bones shivering, the pain finally lessening enough for him to feel it again. Making many whimpers, his left eye returned to focus with Nero's gaze. The prince smiled, tilting his head. You know, I wonder what your brother is thinking right now. Feeling all this pain just as you do? You're pathetic. All you ever wanted was to protect him, but you forgot to protect yourself. As Nightmare's jaw fell open, all he could vocalize were whines. Shh, said Nero, closing Nightmare's jaw gently before putting a finger to his mouth. Listen to this. You're gonna love to hear it. I've decided not to kill you, for now. There were a few chuckles as Nero leaned down to whisper in the skeleton's ear. I think Dream would appreciate the full experience. I'm gonna do to him what I just did to you, and you're gonna watch. Energy rushed back into Nightmare's body, his soul pounding harder and harder. Through the pain, he suddenly felt strength, as unbridled rage burst through his bones. He didn't care anymore if Nero tortured him. He didn't care anymore if Nero killed him, even if the same would happen to his brother. But his dignity. Though it had been stripped of him, to hell would he allow the same thing to happen to Dream. Screaming in fury, Nightmare could see the light from his left eye so brightly it reflected off his crown on Nero's head. In a fit of berserk rage, Nightmare's right arm slipped the human's grip, fingers sharp as claws tearing across Nero's face. The men cried out, some leaping back as they hadn't expected Nightmare to strike. As one of them tried to grab his arm, he felt the darkness over his body and his soul bursting out of his back. Writhing, twisting roots pushed the skeleton from the ground, expanding and absorbing the fear and hatred of the men around him. "What the fuck? What the hell is that?" one of the men cried, none of them taking notice of Nero's screams and bloody face. Like a tree suddenly growing in place, Nightmare was pushed off the ground, his limp body towering feet above the mob. As the men stepped back in awe and confusion, Nightmare felt his body expanding into the roots, coming out of his back. The roots felt like extra legs and arms that were within his control. But most of all, they were without pain or strain, but filled plenty with loathing. Part of the roots had grown out of his right socket, permanently blinding him, but his left socket shot open, full of energy and full of vengeance. Once he realized the control he had, the roots began whipping out in all directions, striking, stabbing, slicing the humans to pieces. Nightmare corrected his body so that he essentially floated in place, the roots holding him up like a giant spider. The screams of the men filled his ears like a sweet melody, a tune that was snuffed out too soon as blood sprayed everywhere across the sacred grove. And he laughed. Nightmare laughed. Even as sore as his jaw was, he couldn't open it wide enough to express his amusement. It was all just a cruel joke, but a joke that made him laugh harder than any ever had before. Men were trying to run, but they weren't going to get anywhere. Nightmare made chase, his horrific gaze locking onto the survivors as they tried to escape into the woods. One to the left, two to the right. Swift as the wind, Nightmare let the roots carry him, bounding towards the man on the left, slicing off his legs just as he reached the edge of the forest, dropping his torch in the brush. Whipping around, the two other men fled towards the other decline. The roots flung Nightmare into the air, whirling him across the grove in seconds. The men had managed to get into the woods, but Nightmare swung himself off tree trunks and branches, quickly catching up. A root stabbed one man to the back of his neck, the other through his gut. Somehow, in all the chaos, Nero found himself crawling, laying in the grove. He'd been stabbed in the back by one of the roots, his legs refusing to respond. All around him, the bodies of the men he had brought were a gory display, his face bleeding where Nightmare had clawed across it. Breathing and grunting, Nero tried once again to stand, but his legs were going numb, losing their strength. In moments, he looked up to see a black shadow approaching him. That black skeleton with roots writhing from its back like snakes. "Now Nightmare, things have just gotten off track," said Nero, pushing himself away. "We could just forget about this and go back to how things..." Not a second more, one of Nightmare's roots whipped across Nero's throat, sending his head flying, still with his crown attached. It hit the ground with a gentle thud. Nero's neck sprang blood for a moment before it completely collapsed. There was silence. Not a single bird or insect made a sound. Eventually, there was only the wind as Nightmare stood in the carnage, slowly gazing over his work. Light began to rise from both sides of the forest. The dry branches and leaves from the summer days easily caught flame. But Nightmare didn't care. Looking at his hands, they were shaking. When he was feeling their hatred, their fear, then their pain, it felt so exhilarating, like every fiber of his being had sparked to life. But now, in the silence, with every one of their souls shattered, there was nothing. Without the opiatic high that their emotions had provided, his own agony and pain came rushing in. Arching over, he thought he'd be sick, falling back to his knees. Where are they? Where? Nightmare wheezed, crawling towards one of the bodies. Searching the man's pockets, he found one of the golden apples, but as he touched it, it grew soft in his fingers. Lifting it to the glowing light of the fires, it turned to sludge in his hand. No! 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 He searched again and again. Each time finding a golden apple, it turned to mush in his grip. Desperate, he shoved the rotten sludge into his mouth, but its bitterness provided no relief. Nightmare screamed. Gripping his skull, his body and roots writhed on the ground from the overwhelming flood of emotions. Make it stop! Stop it! Oh! He shrieked, his functioning eye begging the stars above. Make it go away! In minutes, the fires of the forest turned into a massive blaze. The warm glow framed each side of the sacred tree in front of Nightmare. It was mocking him. Everything was mocking him. The tree, the world, life itself. All a cruel joke, and he wasn't laughing anymore. You put me here to suffer, he screamed at the tree. You gave me life just so you could toy with me. The roots slowly pushed Nightmare back into the air, feeling his body grow hot and berserk once again. I've had enough. Enough of you. Enough of living. The game is over, and I'm taking the rest of your toys with me. A mass bundle of the roots shaped themselves into a giant blade before Nightmare sliced it clean through the base of the sacred tree's trunk. Upon doing so, it felt like an invisible thread had been broken in his soul. Everything felt weightless all at once, like drifting in a void. Distracted by the feeling, Nightmare didn't notice a fluttering sound that came behind him, or the summoning of a magic bow. A blast of golden magic ripped through his ribcage, cutting clean through, passing the leaves of the tree as it fell and disappeared into the white sea. Nightmare gasped in pain, but so did another. His eyes widened as he recognized the voice behind him and the wheezing. What is, said Dream. Even though Nightmare's ribs were broken and bleeding from the strike, he turned around, seeing Dream on his knees. Wearing a white uniform and cloak, the clothes had been soaked with his own drying blood from the long torture Nightmare had been suffering. His golden eyes rose to meet Nightmare's gaze, his hands gripping his chest where his own ribs were now bleeding. Nightmare? Dream called out in horror and surprise, both at what he had done and as he recognized his brother's face. What had he done? In Nightmare's despair, he felled the sacred tree. He cut down the most vital part of both of their being. He doomed them both to death. Don't look at me! Nightmare growled, the roots inching him away from Dream. Nightmare, wait! I'm sorry! I didn't know it was you! Dream cried, tears falling down his cheeks. No! Nightmare shook his head, clutching his chest. He felt the blood loss taking his consciousness. No! Wailing, covering his arms over his skull, Nightmare turned away and ran. His roots carried him straight for the white sea. Nightmare, no! Dream cried out as his twin threw himself into the endless white, disappearing completely.